Chapter 2. Stand Up and Hook Up. Benning, McCall, Bragg, Shanks. December 1942 through September 1943. Benning was, if possible, even more miserable than Toccoa, especially its infamous frying pan area, where the jump training went on. This was the regimental bivouac area, consisting of scrubby little wooden huts set on barren, sandy soil. But Benning was a welcome relief to the men of E Company in the sense that they were getting realistic training for becoming paratroopers, rather than spending most of their waking hours doing physical exercises. Parachute school was supposed to begin with physical training, A stage, followed by B, C, and D stages, each lasting a week. But the 506th skipped A stage. This happened because the 1st Battalion arrived ahead of the others, went into A stage, and embarrassed the jump school sergeants who were assigned to lead the calisthenics and runs. The Toccoa graduates would laugh at the sergeants. On the runs, they would begin running backward, challenge the sergeants to a race, ask them, after a couple of hours of exercises that left the sergeants panting, when they were going to get past the warm-up and into the real thing. After 2 days of such abuse, the sergeants told the CO that the 506th was in much better physical condition than they were, so all the companies of the 506th started in immediately on B stage. For a week, the company double-timed each morning to the packing sheds, where the men learned how to fold and pack their parachutes. They ran back to the frying pan for lunch, then spent the afternoon leaping into sawdust piles from mock doors on dummy fuselages raised 4 feet off the ground, handling parachutes on a suspended harness, or jumping off 30-foot towers in parachute harnesses suspended from a steel cable. The following week, in C stage, the men made free and controlled jumps from the 250-foot towers. One tower had seats, shock absorbers, and chute guide wires. The others had 4 chutes that released when they reached the suspension arm. From these, each man made several daylight jumps and one at night. C stage also featured a wind machine, which blew a gale along the ground, moving both chute and jumper to teach the men how to control and collapse their canopies after landing. After a week at the towers, the enlisted men were ready for D stage, the real thing, the 5 jumps from a C-47 that would earn those who completed the process their parachutists' wings. The men packed their chutes the night before, checked them, then packed them again, checked them again until past 2300. Reveille was 0530. They marched to the hangars at Lawson Field, singing and shouting in anticipation. They put on their chutes, then sat on rows of benches waiting to be summoned to the C-47s. There was joshing, joke-telling, lots of smoking, nervous laughter, frequent trips to the latrine, and repeated checking of the chute and the reserve chute worn on the chest. They loaded up, 24 to a plane. With only 1 or 2 exceptions, it was the first plane ride for the men. When the C-47 reached 1,500 feet, it circled. The red light went on. The jump master, a sergeant instructor, called out, "Stand up and hook up." Each man hooked the line attached to the backpack cover of his main chute to the anchor line running down the middle of the top of the fuselage. "Sound off for equipment check," shouted the jump master. "Number 12 okay. Number 11 okay," and so on down the line. "Close up and stand in the door." The first man stepped up to the open door. All the men had been ordered to look out at the horizon, not straight down, for obvious psychological reasons. They had also been taught to place their hands on the outer edge of the door, never on the inside. With the hands on the outside, there was nothing to hold a man in the plane, and the slightest nudge, even just the sense of the next man pressing forward, would be enough to get him out of the plane. If he tried to steady himself by putting his hands on the inside, as Gordon said, 12 men behind couldn't push that fellow out of there if he didn't want to go. That's the power of fear. When a jump master saw a man put his hands on the inside, he would pull him back and let the others go out. Most of the men, according to Gordon, were so psyched up and in the swim of this thing that we would almost have gone out without a parachute. It was almost that bad. Overall, 94% of the men of the 506th qualified, which set a record that still stands. On the first jump, the men went out one at a time. As soon as he was in the door, the jump master tapped him on the leg. Out he went. I shuffled up to the door and leaped into a vast, breathtaking void, Webster remembered. My heart popped into my mouth, my mind went blank. The static line attached to the hook on the anchor line in the plane pulled the back cover off his main chute. A brake cord, tied to the apex of the chute, pulled the canopy out of the pack and then parted. The prop blast inflated the chute, and he felt a terrific opening shock. From then on, the jump was fun. I drifted down, oscillating, or as civilians would say, swinging to and fro, and joyously looking around. The sky was filled with high-spirited troopers shouting back and forth. Standing in that open door was an obvious moment of truth. Men who had been outstanding in training, men who later won medals for bravery in combat as ordinary infantry, would freeze. Sometimes they were given a second chance, either on that flight after the others had jumped, or the next day. Usually, however, if a man froze once, he would never jump. 2 members of E Company froze. They refused to jump. One of them, Private Joe Ramirez, was pushed to the back of the plane, but after everyone jumped out, he told the jump master that he wanted to jump. The plane circled the field. On the second pass, he jumped. As Private Rod Stroll put it, that took more guts than for a guy to go out the first time. Easy made its second jump that afternoon, with the men again going out one at a time. The next jump was a mass affair, the jump master shouting, "Go, go, go," as the 12 men in the stick moved into the doorway. The sticks cleared the plane in 6 seconds, to the astonishment of the jump master. Carson wrote in his diary, "I think I am getting jump crazy, because when I'm on the ground, I think of the thrill of jumping and I want to jump some more. When I feel that opening jerk, I shout with all my might." The 4th jump came on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Day, the company got the day off and a nice turkey feast. It was the first Christmas away from home for virtually every man in the company. Carson wrote, "It don't seem like Christmas. No snow, no tree, no presents, no mom and dad." On December 26th, the last jump, each man got a certificate declaring that he was entitled to be rated from this date as a qualified parachutist. Then the proudest moment of all, the one toward which they had been working for 6 months, the pinning on of the silver wings. From that moment, never to be forgotten, each member of Easy, every member of the 506th, was forever special. Colonel Sink held a regimental parade, then gathered the men around him. Standing on a platform, he read out an order of the day. The men later got printed copies. "You are a member of one of the finest regiments in the United States Army," Sink declared, "and consequently in the world." He said he was sending them home on a 10-day furlough and reminded them that there were certain things that are expected of you, not only while on furlough, but also a creed by which you are expected to govern your life. They should walk with pride and military bearing, take care of their personal appearance, and remember our battle cry and motto, Currahee, and its meaning, standing alone. We stand alone together. He ordered the men to stay out of jail and dismissed them. Wearing their wings, their boots polished, the trousers bloused into the boots, off they went. When they got home, they were objects of wonder to their parents and friends, obviously because of their physical fitness, but even more because of the self-confidence they had acquired in the past half year. They had been through a training course that 3 out of 5 volunteers could not complete. They had survived Sobel's wrath and harassment. They had jumped out of an airplane in flight. They were elite. Not so elite, however, that they were free to ignore Army rules and regulations. Colonel Sink had warned them to get back to Benning when the furlough was up. But what with the inadequacies of the air, rail, and bus transportation systems in America in January 1943, an alarming number of the 506th were late reporting back for duty. Colonel Sink held a regimental parade. The men turned out in their Class A or dress uniforms. They were marched down a sandy street to an empty lot behind the cook's hutments. Sink called them to attention, then gave the command at ease. They watched and listened in silence as the lieutenant read a list of names, one from each company, from among the men who had reported in last. "Private John Doe, E Company," the lieutenant called out. A drummer, standing beside the lieutenant, beat a soft, mournful roll. Two sergeants bearing submachine guns moved to Private Doe. He stepped from the ranks. His face was pale. The sergeants, one on each side, escorted him forward. The drum continued to roll. They stopped in front of the lieutenant. He read out the orders. Private Doe was being drummed out of the paratroopers, condemned to the infantry. The lieutenant ripped the 506th patch from the private's arm, the wings from his chest, the parachute patch from his hat, and threw them all on the ground. It was so humiliating that the officers and men were cursing under their breath. Webster wrote his mother, "One thing stirred us all up to a fighting madness. Some cheap lieutenant without any sense of decency or good taste stood beside the drummer, snapping pictures of all the fellows who came up. Bad enough to be humiliated before your friends, but to be photographed in your disgrace. That lieutenant ought to be shot." There was more. A jeep drove up and dumped out Private Doe's barracks bags. He had to take off his boots, put on regular shoes, wear his pants down like a regular infantryman, straight legs, as the paratroopers called them. He picked up his bags, and, followed by the submachine gunners, marched sadly away, the drum continuing to roll, a picture of bleak loneliness. This was repeated 9 times. After that, the 506th had little problem with men returning late from a furlough. In late January, Easy and the rest of the 506th moved across the Chattahoochee River to the Alabama side of Fort Benning. It was like going from prison to freedom. The barracks were comfortable and the food good. There was a fine PX and a movie theater. The training concentrated on squad problems, especially house-to-house fighting, which was fun, with lots of explosions, firing blanks at one another, tossing smoke grenades. The men made their 6th jump, the first with rifles. Carson's diary entries capture the flavor of those winter days. February 8. Last night we were in a hell-raising mood, so we tore the barracks apart in a pillow fight. After 3 hours of fighting, we finally decided that we were tired and went to bed. February 11. Corporal Joe Toya, Sergeant George Lutz, and I go to Columbus. Called up the girls and had a party. Fun and more fun. Sometime during the party, I ran into Betty, the key to Columbus. We finally had to get home and got here 4:45 a.m. February 12. Back to Chickasaw Gardens in Columbus, and another lovely evening. Betty and I hit it off swell. Really had fun. Got home at 4:45 a.m. and went on duty at 5:30 with one eye open. In March, it was pack 'em up, we're moving out. Camp McCall, North Carolina, was a marvel of wartime construction. On November 7, 1942, it consisted of 62,000 acres of wilderness. 4 months later, it had 65 miles of paved roads, a 1,200-bed hospital, 5 movie theaters, 6 huge beer gardens, a complete all-weather airfield with 3 5,000-foot runways, and 1,750 buildings. The barracks were heated. The cots had mattresses. It was named for Private John T. McCall of the 82nd Airborne Division, the first American paratrooper to be killed in combat in World War II. He died on November 8th, the day construction began, in North Africa. Camp McCall was home to the Airborne Command. Training intensified and became more sophisticated. The jumps now included not only rifles, but other small arms. The bazooka had to be jumped in one piece. The light machine guns also, although the tripod could be separated and carried by a second man. 2 men split the 60mm mortar and its base plate. Food, ammunition, maps, hand grenades, high explosives, and more were attached to the paratroopers. Some men were jumping with 100 extra pounds. After the jumps, there were 2- and 3-day exercises in the woods, with the main focus on quick troop movements and operating behind enemy lines as large forces. At dusk, platoon leaders were shown their location on maps, then told to be at such and so by morning. Captain Sobel made Private Robert Popeye Wynn his runner. He sent Wynn out to locate his platoons. Wynn managed to get lost and spent the night catching up on his sleep. In the morning, Sobel demanded to know why Wynn got lost. "Because I can't see in the dark," Wynn replied. "You had better learn to see in the dark," Sobel rejoined, and sent Wynn back to his squad, replacing him with Ed Tipper as runner. "With my help," Tipper recounted, "Sobel was able to mislay his maps, compass, and other items when he most needed them. He was getting similar assistance from others and was disoriented and lost even more than usual. We were all hoping that he'd screw up so badly that he'd be replaced and we wouldn't have to go into combat under his command." "Your rifle is your right arm," Sobel would tell his men. "It should be in your possession every moment." On one night exercise, he decided to teach his men a lesson. He and Sergeant Evans went sneaking through the company position to steal rifles from sleeping men. The mission was successful. By daylight, Sobel and Evans had nearly 50 rifles. With great fanfare, Evans called the company together, and Sobel began to tell the men what miserable soldiers they were. As he was yelling, the CO of Fox Company, accompanied by some 45 of his men, came up. To Sobel's great embarrassment, it turned out that he and Evans had been lost, strayed into Fox Company's bivouac area, and stolen their rifles. A couple of weeks later, Sobel hurt his feet on a jump. He and Sergeant Evans returned to barracks while the company stayed in the field. The captain and the first sergeant conducted a private inspection. They searched through all the footlockers, clothing, and personal possessions of the men of E Company. They went through pockets, broke open boxes, rifled letters from girlfriends and family, and confiscated all items they considered contraband. "I don't know what the hell they were looking for," Gordon Carson commented. "Those were the days before drugs." Sobel posted a list identifying the contraband, the offender, and the punishment. The men returned from the field exercise, exhausted and filthy, to find that everything they thought of as personal property was in disarray. Underwear, socks, toothpaste, and toothbrushes all piled up on top of the bunks. Many items were missing. Nearly every soldier had something confiscated. Generally, it was unauthorized ammunition, non-regulation clothing, or pornography. Cans of fruit cocktail and sliced peaches stolen from the kitchen were gone, along with expensive shirts. None of it ever returned. One soldier had been collecting prophylactic kits. A few condoms were evidently acceptable, but 200 constituted contraband. They were posted on Sobel's list of confiscated items. "That marked a turning point for me," Tipper recalled. "Before Sobel's raid, I had disliked him, but I had not really hated the man. Afterward, I decided Sobel was my personal enemy, and I did not owe him loyalty or anything else. Everyone was incensed." There was talk about who was going to shoot Sobel when the company got into combat. Tipper thought it was just talk, but on the other hand, I was aware of a couple of guys in Company E who said little, but who, in my judgment, were fully capable of killing Sobel if they got the chance. On the next field exercise, E Company was told that a number of its men would be designated as simulated casualties, so the medics could practice bandaging wounds, improvising casts and splints, evacuating men on litters, and so forth. Sobel was told that he was a simulated casualty. The medics put him under a real anesthetic, pulled down his pants, and made a real incision simulating an appendectomy. They sewed up the incision and bound it up with bandages and surgical tape, and then disappeared. Sobel was furious, naturally enough, but he got nowhere in pressing for an investigation. Not a man in Company E could be found who could identify the guilty medics. How fit the men of Easy were was demonstrated at McCall when the Department of the Army had Strayer's 2nd Battalion, already famous for the march to Atlanta, take a standard physical fitness test. The battalion scored 97%. As this was the highest score ever recorded for a battalion in the Army, a Colonel Jablonski from Washington thought Strayer had rigged the score. Winters recalled, "They had us run it a second time. Officers, men, service personnel, cooks, everybody. And we scored 98%. Promotions were coming Easy's way. All three staff sergeants, James Deal, Salty Harris, and Mike Ranney, were original members of the company who had started out as privates. So too with the sergeants, Leo Boyle, Bill Guarnieri, Carwood Lipton, John Martin, Elmer Murray, Bob Rader, Bob Smith, Buck Taylor, and Murray Roberts. Carson made corporal. Lieutenant Matheson moved up to regimental staff, while Lieutenants Nixon, Hester, and George Lavinson moved on to the battalion staff. Through to the end of the war, every vacancy on the 2nd Battalion staff was filled with an officer from Easy. Companies D, F, and HQ did not send a single officer up to battalion. Winters commented, "This is why communications between battalion, regimental HQ, and Company E were always excellent. It is also why Company E always seemed to be called upon for key assignments." In early May, Winters' 1st Platoon got a new 2nd Lieutenant, Harry Welsh. He was a reluctant officer. In April 1942, he had volunteered for the paratroopers and been assigned to the 504th PIR of the 82nd Airborne. After jump school, he made sergeant 3 times. He kept getting busted back to private for fighting, but he was a tough little Irishman with obvious leadership potential. His company commander noticed and recommended Welsh for OCS. Welsh was assigned to Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th PIR. He had wanted to return to the 504th, but Army doctrine was to send OCS graduates to new units because it feared that if they went back to their old outfit, they would be too familiar with their enlisted friends. Sobel put Welsh in Winters' platoon. They immediately became the closest of friends. The relationship was based on mutual respect, brought about by an identical view of leadership. "Officers go first," as Welsh put it. At the end of May, the men of Easy packed up their barracks bags and joined the other companies of the 506th for a stop-and-go train ride to Sturgis, Kentucky. At the depot, Red Cross girls had coffee and donuts for them, the last bit of comfort they would know for a month. They marched out into the countryside and pitched pup tents, dug straddle trenches for latrines, and ate the Army's favorite meal for troops in the field, creamed chipped beef on toast, universally known as SOS, or shit on a shingle. This was not combat, but it was as close as the Army could make it. The maneuvers held in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana from June 5th to July 15th, 1943, combined paratroopers and glider-borne troops in the largest airborne exercise to date. On June 10th, the 506th PIR officially joined the 101st Airborne Division, thus making that date the greatest day the 101st ever had. Adding the 506th noticeably raised the morale of the 101st, at least according to the men of E Company. The maneuvers, pitting the Red Army against the Blue Army, ranged over a wide area of backwoods, hills, and mountains. Easy made 3 jumps. Christensen remembered one of them vividly. It was hot, stifling inside the C-47, and the heated air rising in currents from the hills caused the plane to bob and weave. Corporal Denver Bull Randleman, at the back of the stick, and thus farthest from the open door, began vomiting into his helmet. The man in front of him took one look and lost his lunch. The process worked right up the line. Not everyone managed to vomit into his helmet. The floor was awash in vomit. The plane stank. Christensen, at the front, was hanging on, but barely. My stomach was on the verge of rebellion. Why don't they turn on the green light? There it is. From behind, shouts of, "Go, go, God damn it, go!" Out I went into the clean, fresh air. I felt as if someone had passed a magic wand over my head and said, "Christensen, you feel great." And I did. The maneuvers featured extended night marches, wading through streams, climbing the far bank, making 3 feet only to slide back 2, stumbling over rocks, stumps, and roots, cutting a swath through matted underbrush, and occasionally enjoying fried chicken prepared by Tennessee Hill people. The men were tired, filthy, itching all over. In late July, the maneuvers completed, the 2nd Battalion of the 506th received a commendation from Major General William C. Lee, commander of the 101st, for splendid aggressive action, sound tactical doctrine, and obviously well-trained individuals. General Lee expressed his confidence that future tests will reveal further indications of excellent training and leadership. Easy moved from Sturgis to Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky, where there were barracks, hot showers, and other luxuries. But the camp was overflowing, and once again it was the little pup tents for sleeping quarters, the ground for a mattress. It did not last long, as most of the men got 10-day furloughs, and shortly after they reported back, the entire division took trains to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It was immediately obvious that Bragg was a staging area as the division prepared to ship overseas. The food was better, there were beds in barracks with hot showers and other improvements. But the real giveaway was a total re-outfitting. The men got new clothes, new weapons, new gear. They spent their days on the firing range, sighting in the rifles and machine guns. Where they were going, east or west, the European, Mediterranean, or Pacific theater, no one knew. Rumors flew from platoon to platoon. Bets were made. On weekends, the men went into Fayetteville to prime the pump at the town pump, one of the local bars. Brawls were frequent. Most were started by the paratroopers, who would pitch into the regular soldiers stationed at Bragg. They also goaded the glider troops, who were part of the 101st. The glider troops were regular soldiers assigned to the glider regiment. Although they were airborne, they were not volunteers and were treated by the Army as second-class men. They did not receive the $50 per month bonus. They had no special badges. They did not wear boots and blouse trousers. Some of them made up posters showing photographs of crashed and burned gliders with a caption that read, "Join the glider troops. No flight pay, no jump pay, but never a dull moment." A few members of Easy went down to the airfield at Bragg to take a ride on a glider. The experience of landing in one of those plywood crates convinced them that jumping with a chute was a better way to land. When General Lee made a glider flight, the landing fractured several of his ribs. "Next time I'll take a parachute," he remarked. "We told you so," the glider troops shouted. In July 1944, the glider men finally got the hazardous duty bonus of $50 per month and a special insignia. In mid-August, the division assembled in regimental formation. A band played "Over There," and the Red Cross girls cried as the men marched to the 20 trains waiting to take them off to war. Once aboard and somewhat settled down, the betting began over which way the trains would head. North toward New York, and then Europe or the Mediterranean, or west toward California and then the Pacific. The trains headed north toward Camp Shanks, 30 miles up the Hudson River from New York City. Promises were made about passes into the city, promises that were not kept. Instead, it was more inspections followed by inoculations. Shot followed shot, Christensen remembered, until our arms hung from our bodies like limp ropes. Officers and non-coms got to know the Preparation for Overseas Movement manual by heart. Sobel wrote up a form letter to send to the mothers of his troopers. "Dear Madam," it began, "soon your son, Private First Class Paul C. Rogers," each name was typed in, "will drop from the sky to engage and defeat the enemy. He will have the best of weapons and equipment, and have had months of hard and strenuous training to prepare him for success on the battlefield. Your frequent letters of love and encouragement will arm him with a fighting heart. With that he cannot fail, but will win glory for himself, make you proud of him, and his country ever grateful for his service in its hour of need." He signed each letter with a flourish, "Herbert M. Sobel, Captain, Commanding." The enlisted men got hold of some whiskey. They were accustomed to beer, so the whiskey hit them hard. Christensen got so drunk he was making out with the toilet, a condition common to young men who have just been introduced to whiskey. Corporal Randleman found him and gently carried him to bed. The next morning, the air filled with the moans and groans of the hungover men, the company marched down to the docks. A ferry carried the men to a pier, where hot coffee and donuts from the Red Cross girls helped revive the near dead. There was a great deal of cursing, partly because the men had hoped to march through New York City on their way to war and did not. Also because they were not allowed to wear their jump boots. The reason? Enemy spies might see them and would know that an airborne division was shipping out. They had to take the patch of the 101st, the Screaming Eagle, off their shoulders. Winters remembered only one case of gangplank fever. A medical officer was just smart enough to know what to take to be assigned to sick call and miss the voyage. All the others lined up in single file to walk up the gangplank, lugging their barracks bags and weapons. As they stepped onto the liner, converted into a troop transport, and called out their names, a checker marked them present. It took almost a full day to get the 5,000 men aboard a transport built to carry 1,000 passengers. Finally, tugs towed the ship from her berth, and she started steaming out to sea. The men of Easy Company lined the rails to see the Statue of Liberty slip astern. For nearly every one of them, it was his first trip outside the United States. A certain homesickness set in, coupled with a realization, as the regimental scrapbook Currahee put it, of how wonderful the last year had been.